arms race. I mean, at the end of the day, AI technology is going to go into weaponry. Okay, so all of these countries are also fighting for dominance, right? And look, like I said, as much as I'm a pessimist, this is the challenge of our generation, right? As far as I'm concerned, because yes, I get that we don't want to regulate because we may not put ourselves in a competitive position against China, we may not be regulating the way we would want to regulate. And that goes for all other countries too. I mean, right now, yes, China and the US are competing, but there's other countries who are developing their own AI technologies too. They don't have the same types of regulations that we would ideally want. And so one of the reasons we're also not regulating is also to stay competitive. Because do we want to be the dominant player on the global stage or not? Right? And what sacrifices are we willing to make to do that? And what sacrifices are we willing to make as a global society to do that? And so I believe, to me, those are the big questions of our time.
Yeah, I think what you've discussed, the fly in the pudding, so to speak, is the human element. But and I, without getting into detail, I'll just mention one name: Cambridge Analytica. The first time I encountered something that read about them, I was so scared. I was so alarmed that I reached out immediately and emailed an old roommate of mine who had been working in the computer industry for 40 years by then and said, have you ever heard of Cambridge Analytica? And then I can't repeat the comment that I added to that. And he got back, repeated my comment and said, that's why I don't subscribe to Facebook. And it turned out Facebook was feeding them the data. And the sophistication of Cambridge is they found out you don't like Pepsi Cola, something innocuous. And you're looking, and there's a political, there's an election coming up. And they notice you seem to like this candidate, but that's not the candidate they want you to like. So they put over here, a little Pepsi Cola ad. Anytime you see that candidate or look up that candidate. So subconsciously, it's like something's bothering me. That doesn't mean you're going to convert, but you're hesitating. And I'll leave you with this. You said, have we used AI? Yes. Well, anytime you make an inquiry, you do. I haven't worked with the programming or anything, but programming is, as you know, GIGO. GIGO? Yeah. And in my day, they didn't have Excel. They were just starting to have it. You had plain language programs. Microsoft has now made BASIC available again for free. I think maybe to inform the folks out there as to how algorithms and computational algorithms and things work, to make you a little bit more literate about these sorts of things. So AI, I've inquired. I've had answers that AI brought up on the internet that are wrong. But I've also had a couple where it had an attitude and it was wrong. Like, what? That would never happen. This thing, and I know that it did, and that, it was something I was, but it's funny, the most recent one, and I'll leave it with this. I put a kind of tongue-in-cheek into the internet, and it got back to me with more detail, with some good, so in this case it was, a satirical, that's a satirical piece that you're putting in. Now you know it's a satire, that I'm actually satirizing something. So you have that high level of sophistication. Sometimes it seems to work, and other times there are flaws in it. There are flaws in it. It does make mistakes. There are errors. I think it will come to fruition in more set-piece analytical situations first, and hopefully. But the fly is the human element, and you're going to have people out there with ill intent.
I have one very quick thing. I make mistakes all the time too. But with every major technical development, advancement, like major milestone ones, I'll go back to email, but text messaging as well. It's the Wild West until there's regulation and governance. So right now we're in the Wild West, but the regulation and the governance is soon to come. Once people figure out how to abuse it and use it for their evil powers and whatnot, there will be governance, there will be regulation, and it will find a calm.
So you bring up Cambridge Analytica. So if anybody hasn't seen it, The Great Hack on Netflix is essentially the story of Cambridge Analytica. Now, Cambridge Analytica, for all intents and purposes, was a marketing firm that essentially used all the same methodologies that I was referring to, the reason why I got out of digital media. All right? I mean, so much so that we were actually able to even predict Trump was going to win the election in July of 2016 before it even happened, right? Because you could actually see it. So Cambridge Analytica, for example, had 5,000 data points on every single U.S. citizen, all right? 5,000 data points. 5,000 data points, that's how you spend money with your credit cards. That's all of your surfing behavior on the internet. That's what you're searching for. That's what you're browsing. That's what you're interacting with. That's all of anything else that you're interacting with digitally is all being pulled into these centralized data management platforms that are then being resold outward to these trading platforms in terms of how you buy and sell digital advertising. Now, to make it even more scary for you, and this is really relevant for AI, you can actually now start to simulate how people are going to react to your advertising because there's so much data on every individual right now that I can look at a particular segment of a population and I can, with a flip of the switch, say I want this many sales or that many sales, I want to have it over this many times, and the algorithms know so much about you individually, they know exactly how to influence you at the cognitive levels to drive your interaction. We're all vulnerable to this. And that's the reason why disinformation and misinformation continues to perpetuate everywhere. And with generative AI and everything else, it's all just going to get worse unless we do regulate it. And so that's something we have to be very mindful of, especially when we start to think about the kids that are starting to use all of these tools and really becoming reliant on it, right? Because that's just increasingly driving way more data out there and way more a depth of understanding of people at the individual level, which makes it a lot easier for people who want to influence a behavior to do so. So it's something we all have to be very cognizant of.
Yeah, I think the Cambridge Analytica thing was particularly bad because it was without consent. And I think you're going to have a big bell curve of people that are okay with giving their information, their every personal, deep conversation to a database for whatever reason. And you're seeing that now accelerated with AI. You know, people are choosing to engage in it. It's, you know, there all these things. You don't have any of the same protections you have with an AI you have with a lawyer or a spouse or anything like that. So people should be careful. And I think that's a big societal question. I think on the usage of it in you know harmful ways definitely has to get regulated. But it's a big societal question on what people will be comfortable with. People loved Facebook. Facebook was free. It turned out it wasn't free. It turned out that you were the product. And so I think that's what's powered. I think what's interesting is the business model for the internet has been advertising. It's basically the business model for the internet. What you're seeing now with these models, with ChatGPT or whatever, is people are actually willing to pay for the utility of that tool. So they're willing to pay, let's say, $20 a month or $200 a month to get this like personal assistant. What's interesting about that is if your data is protected in there and they have an incentive to protect that because you know, you're paying for it, then maybe you don't have this business model of the internet anymore being advertising. Maybe you have a subscription model. And maybe that means, yes, you're giving a lot more information to this thing, but maybe it means on the whole, you know, we're not having that incentivization for the smartest people of my generation certainly working on how do I make you click an ad. That's basically what all the smartest people that I know have been working on the last 15, 20 years. So maybe that's an upside to that, but we'll have to see. That's a societal choice.
I mean, if we look at the newspapers and the news organizations, right? I mean, one thing we're learning very quickly is that people would rather have free than pay, and that's what I prefer. I do agree with you. I do think there's going to be there's a subscription model that we're all doing right now, like you know whether it's getting the plus version or the pro versions of these apps. But I do think that's probably going to end up being a small percentage. I think when you start to look at the amount of revenue that these companies are going to have to generate based on their valuations and the pressure they get from their shareholders, they're going to need so many different types of revenue models in order to close that gap. And advertising, I think, is going to be the largest revenue stream out of all of that because everyone's going to be using these technologies. And if there's one thing we have learned from social media is that people would rather give up their data and get it for free. But that's because things like giving consent without knowing exactly how your data is being used, right? That's the challenge, right? And this goes right back to the ad choices thing that I was talking about earlier. We've got to make it more transparent for people to let them know how their data is being used. And if anything, compensate people for the fact that you're giving up your data, right? And really make it a value exchange. And I fear that right now, all these companies are doing is exploiting all of our data and frankly, all of our history of creative works, right? To develop their models in order to just continue to perpetuate this problem and use it as a means to just drive advertising revenue. So that is my big fear right now. And then what we just see is the issues that we're feeling with social media just becomes exacerbated. And I worry that we're not, if we let it go for too long, trying to dig ourselves out of that hole could take decades.
Open it up for more questions.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. I want to thank Faytian College and all the panelists for putting this program together. More than anything else, it's an educational experience for everybody in the community. This is new for all of us. We're still learning as we go. And it's such a great opportunity that we have such local experts right here in our county, and the college has put together this great forum. So I encourage you to help us continue to get our community prepared. It seems like you're doing a great job. We're always looking at all the economic development aspects of preparing the community, usually infrastructure, water, sewer, electricity, huge, a major issue when we're looking at big projects. So really just want to say thank you to you all. Look forward to continued forums like this. I think they're very helpful to help us all prepare.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. So I could add on this. Recently, I joined the Harvard Medical School, the AI in healthcare, in terms of the strategy and the implementations. I will do my best to learn more, then potentially bring what I learned from the courses to this community, to these young fellows, have a more discussion. I think it's really honor to be here, have a great panel discussion with everybody.
Yeah, it is true though, Steve. I think from all the fears that are happening or all the good things, and there's a balance of all that, the reality is that there's an immense amount of prosperity that's going to come from this technological revolution. You're already seeing it. And I think the question is, and it sounds like a selfish question, but who gets to capitalize on that opportunity? And I think that from all the negative that will happen or could happen, we will get immense prosperity lift. And for me, I live in this community, I care about this community, and I think you all do too. And my goal would be, how do we help everyone? How does this become a high tide situation that lifts all boats? And I think making sure that, especially in areas that don't have as much opportunity, haven't had a tech industry, and if you look at the booms people have gotten from the tech industries, I mean, it has built some of the greatest cities that we have. And so I think there's a real opportunity to disperse that into communities like this, and people's living standards can really, really improve. So that's an area I'm really excited about.
Hi, so I have this question for all members of the panelists, but this is what I pick up from the sharing of Jason Burnham. When you talk about the business strategy of mid to big company, you mentioned that for the board of director or like for the leaders of the company, when they want to bring in AI with the mindset to activate and to support the people of the company, they should acknowledge the resistance and the fear of the people worrying that AI gonna replace their job. So do you have, for all of you, do you have any specific example, any company, any leaders that, how do they do that? Like what step, what extra mile that they willing to go to bring in that mindset, and then how do they do to help the people to engage with AI, and how do they actually use AI to help their people to improve within the company?
Yeah, so I'll start. So first I'll say this. It doesn't even, for any company, any organization, this goes for the work I'm doing at Cornwall. This also goes for any company out there who is trying to implement anything. It doesn't even matter whether it's AI, any kind of new technology, new processes, whatever it is. The key is co-creation, right? It is about how do you actually develop, I would say, develop strategies, right, in collaboration and co-creation, right, with those actors and stakeholders who are going to be directly impacted by their outcomes, right? So what leaders need to start doing, good leaders do, what most leaders need to start doing, is starting to engage all the different layers of their organization and all of the different functions to understand what their needs are, right? To understand what their priorities are. The reality is leaders, bad leaders will come in and just say, hey, we got to do this technology and force this technology onto an organization. It's not how you do it. And don't get me wrong, a lot of companies do that because they're like, it becomes a mandate and everybody has to do it. But here's the thing. Usually, every single time, especially in large organization, leaders' perspectives of the culture is very different than the frontline employees in terms of their perspectives of the culture and what they think the needs and the priorities are, right? And so, having a little bit of humility as a leader and recognizing like, hey, I don't really know everything that's going on a day-to-day basis to really understand like what are people really focused in on? What really are their challenges? Why is there resistance when we try to implement new changes? So the first thing leaders should do is really build a stakeholder engagement plan, right? Really thinking about how you're communicating the vision of the organization, but then working with different stakeholder groups to understand what their needs are, and then define the use cases, right, for how technology can help support their work, right, within their roles and within their functions. But even once you've done that, when you're ready to implement, you also need to engage them in the process of implementation to make sure it's also implemented and utilized in a way that is conducive to how people perform their job function on a day-to-day basis, right? And so I say start there, and then of course you want to make sure that you're holding people accountable to the change. We talk about change management and transformation. It all falls apart in accountability, right? Because you're not measuring success. So you also need to be able to track your milestones. You need to understand like, how do we know we're improving? So what are those measures that we're gonna look at improvement around? And then how are we ensuring that we're kind of engaging stakeholders to meet those milestones? And if they can't meet those milestones, understanding why, and then as leaders, focus on helping to remove those barriers for those employees so that they can better adopt their new ways of working.
You know, it doesn't matter whether it's AI, and I love that you said this. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's AI or anything else. People want to be valued. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. So when you have a great leader and you have great organizations that care about the culture, they are going to have those one-on-ones, those touch points from the time you onboard someone through the time that they leave the organization. So when you do that, you create the means for whether it's AI or it's something else that's going on, it's a change in management, it's a change in anything. You already know what they need. You know about them, you know about their family, you know about their life, you know about what they need to do what you're asking them to do because you care about them as a human being. And that is what every company needs. And when we start with that base that it's human first, then all of the other things kind of take care of themselves.
I don't have too much to add here. I think, AI is a revolution in the workforce, but there's been many other revolutions in the workforce. Typists are less used. Secretaries in general are less used. Like the work that businesses need to be done continues to evolve, and there are some entry-level jobs that are going to be replaced by AI. I think the larger business concern there is how do we train our entry-level workforce if we aren't going to need those entry-level jobs anymore. So I think that's a business challenge that has yet to be solved, but I'm happy that businesses are talking about solving that. Jason said it, there's good leaders that are going to bring their workforce along with them and then train their teammates that are in jobs that are no longer needed into new positions to create value because everyone wants to be valued. But there's going to be bad leaders that, but I like to think that morally and kind of, the good businesses will thrive and the good leaders will thrive and kind of outshine the rest of their competition.
Yeah, first, thanks, great question. I can maybe, from the pharmaceutical company perspective, we are bringing the very new medicine to the human beings. So there's a risk and a benefit. So how common sense is let the science guide us move to the next step. So within our company, actually, we got a lot of the skepticism, criticism from our statisticians. They are doing all the data because it happened to me a couple of years ago when some AI imaging data published with high impact journals, hey, this is some interesting signature, we want to validate it. But when we tried using our internal data, we cannot validate it. So we got a lot of kind of internal, we validate a lot of published, beautiful signature could help early diagnosis of cancer, so on and so forth. So to your questions, other leaders is only the science could guide us to the next step. So we are open to learn everything, rigorously validate these tools in the different settings to figure out what's the best, the settings and what's exactly the benefit, rule out the risk, then gradually apply this. So I think as a leader is open to the new things, rigorously learn all this, let the science guide us for operations, then bring this effective tools potentially in the healthcare.
Yeah, I'll close with this because, we've taken a lot of time and you guys have been very generous. I think number one is people need to be honest, and I think Meg had a good take here, but I'll be honest with all the students in the room. There are no guarantees in this life. And the reality is that things move at the speed of business. And you should understand that when you get employed somewhere, that you have a value to that company, and you're providing that value, and you're paid hopefully above or at your value to that company, and that can change. And that's not a very comfortable thing to hear or know. And so you have a choice. You can work for places that are like much smaller and much more family oriented, and maybe the benefits packages or the competitive salary is different, but you'll get like a very stable thing, and you can learn and grow, and maybe there's not as much disruption in those areas. Or you can work for like larger companies where there's pockets where you're definitely valued and you'll have good work, but maybe are more volatile and competitive. That's kind of where I find myself. And I think the reality of this all is that, there's going to be displacement, but what are you going to do about it? And I think for what I've seen is that, listen, you can get people to embrace AI. Fear is not a great motivator. No great leader does that. But when you can ask people, listen, like, what is all the crap you don't like to do every day? What if I can automate that out? So if I can automate that out, we're seeing that in a lot of functions, right? Like we've taken things that used to take somebody months that take a couple hours now, or weeks to a couple hours now. And so when that happens, as a good employer, you shouldn't say, well, now that you have free time, why don't you go work somewhere else? That would be a bad employer. You would go and you would say, now I can upskill you. And I think there's nobody in the organization I've ever met that woke up and said, I really want to do like this overhead work that has no value today. They don't, but a lot of companies operate on a lot of that work. And when you start to automate that work away, hopefully you can have an abundance mindset where these things change. Not everyone may embrace that change, and they may find themselves in a difficult position where the work they did or continue to do doesn't have as much value to the larger businesses or society. But I think that's not a downer thing. I think that's just being honest. And I think if we're honest with ourselves. So my advice to all the kids here would be embrace everything and have a ton of output. And for like the Steve Martin quote, be so good they can't ignore you. And so if you can do that, you'll always have a job. But I want to thank my panelists tonight. I want to thank Faytian College, and thank you all for coming. So thank you so much.